Jim Parsons is in Paris, where he's just discovered that in the late 18th century, his 6 times great-grandfather, Louis-Francois Trouard, was accepted into the elite Royal Academy of Architecture.
It's the Supreme Court of Architects.
It might as well be the Supreme Court of Architects, yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
This is a distinct and forever thing, exactly.
And he was obviously extremely good at his job and devoted to it and talented at it. Would he live in the palace?
In fact, Trouard has an apartment not in the chateau at Versailles, not in the residence proper, but in a building adjacent to it.
Really?
So if you're interested in continuing to expand your understanding of Louis-Francois Trouard's work and career and get a feel for the period that he lived at Versailles, I think the best thing would be to actually travel there.
So I'm going to Versailles?
Indeed.
I've said wow a lot, but I mean it. It's a sincere wow.
Excellent.
Thank you very, very much for this. I appreciate it. You know, it's funny, we had to go back to the 1700s, but damn it, we found somebody in the arts, really, which is very exciting. But, it's just very appropriate that we've been going through my father's side of the story. Clearly, my father was a man much like Louis-Francois's father was. I'm on no academy to the king, but my father did find a way to allow me to do exactly what I wanted to do. I've always said without that, I wouldn't be doing this right now. I loved school. I loved being in the educational environment. And to find Louis-Francois, who went through essentially grad school in Rome, and before him, we found JB, who went to school when he need not have gone to school to further his career at that point. I think it gets to a point where it's more than a coincidence that this is my blood relation. So I am in Versailles. I am on my way to the Chapelle de la Providence to meet up with Ambrogio Caiani, a specialist in 18th century French architecture and history. Ambrogio?
Yes, indeed.
Hi. Hey,
Hello,
I'm Jim.
How are you?
Very good to meet you, and thank you so much for meeting me here in Versailles. I was just dying to know if I could learn any more about my 6-time great-grandfather, Louis-Francois Trouard, the projects he had worked on, and how his career went.
Well, I certainly think we can help you with that. This church is one of his masterpieces.
This is?
Yes.
Wow. This is quite beautiful. It's very elegant and it's very classy looking, but at the same time, it seems very inviting. So he's doing this, Trouard is doing this while working still within the monarch.
Yes, indeed. Trouard reaches the highest point in his career in 1787 when he is made a premier, an architect of the king first class. Because by now, Trouard is 60. It's quite an achievement because, as I think we all know, France is heading towards rather choppy or stormy seas at this time. And Trouard's nomination as architect first class of the king is only 2 years before the beginning of the French Revolution.
Right.
The French Revolution erupted in response to the lower and middle classes' demands for social and economic equality. But the rebellion was sparked decades earlier by the Age of Enlightenment. This age of reason promoted critical thinking as opposed to tradition and superstition, which inspired French citizens to fight for their rights in the 1789 Revolution. After several years of violent upheaval, the monarchy was abolished, Louis XVI was beheaded, and some 40,000 people, many who had ties to the king, were executed, striking fear into the hearts of royal architects like Louis-Francois Trouard.
Now, architects have a pretty difficult time. 4 are executed, 25 are put in prison.
Why were they executing architects?
It was for the old-fashioned reason of corruption, and they were too perhaps compromised with the old regime.
Sure.
Architects who worked more in the tradition of the French court created spaces which were much more ornate, much more decorated, very much for the private pleasure of the aristocracy. And they had ended up under the hot blade, as the euphemism for the guillotine.
So there is the possibility, at least, that my ancestor could have been executed.
Indeed, but Trouard doesn't have the track record of the other architects who were executed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he really was one of the key figures in the redesign of churches in the Age of Enlightenment.
How fascinating. So what happens to Trouard as an architect of the king once the revolution starts?
The key question is, what was your past like? What did you do before the revolution?
Right.
And what did you do to support it? Trouard seems to have been quite friendly with some pretty liberal and radical thinkers of his age.
Really?
But one of the more interesting figures that he definitely knows was somebody called Father or the Abbé Raynal, who was a member of the Enlightenment. Raynal was so radical in the 18th century that he actually said that slavery was an awful thing.
Wow.
And your grandfather was a deeply intimate friend with him, because we know that Raynal, from the late 70s until the early 80s, lived in Trouard's house in Paris.
You're kidding.
I found a document which is rather interesting on all of this. I'm just going to go and grab this book. We have some of his correspondence. So have a look here, Jim, at page 221.
221. Okay. I see Raynal's name, and I see it again. Bunch of French I can't read. Monsieur Mathieu Trouard. John Adams. What's going on here?
This needs interpretation, and perhaps
Indeed,
the
yes.
translation might
Thank you.
help you a bit.
Letter from Raynal to Franklin, 2nd of February, 1779.
It's just 10 years before the French Revolution.
On Thursday, the 4th of this month, around 11 in the morning, a very pleasant gathering of friends are to have Russian tea at Father Raynal's home. Mr. Franklin is beseeched by all of the party to honor this breakfast with his presence. Is that like Benjamin Franklin?
Yes,
Oh,
quite.
no,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
That is unbelievable.